At the most recent Nintendo Direct, we were introduced to not just a trailer, but also a demo for Project Triangle Strategy, the latest game in the HD 2D series from the developers of Octopath Traveler. That game won't release until 2022, but it's worth taking a look back on how this style was developed to begin with, and how this team is keeping classic Final Fantasy games alive. Here's 5 things you need to know about Octopath Traveler. The Octopath Traveler team have had a hard time determining what other players would actually want. With Bravely Default, they figured that since it was so different to what was in the mainstream, nobody overseas would want to play it, and so at first, it only released in Japan, and it did pretty well, but what they didn't expect was a call from Nintendo asking Square Enix if they could release it in English. It turned out there was a huge demand, and in the end, sold more outside of Japan than back at home. So the development staff realised that the games that they wanted to play ended up being successful all over the world. And so for Octopath Traveler, they just made the game they wanted to. Bravely Default was made as a spiritual successor to Final Fantasy IV, and so they continued that trend with Octopath Traveler being a spiritual successor to Final Fantasy VI, and now Triangle Strategy being the successor to Final Fantasy Tactics. However, just because they're recreating the appeal of these games doesn't necessarily mean we can expect Tactics creator Yasumi Matsuno to write Triangle Strategy. When creating Octopath, they had plenty of opportunities to talk to those that had worked on Final Fantasy VI who were still at Square Enix, but they chose not to, explaining that they wanted to create their own vision, not tied down to their inspiration. One of the standout parts of Octopath is the invention of what they call HD 2D, where pixel art is combined with 3D detailed lighting and high-resolution effects. At first, they were just making the game with pixel art, with assistance from the artists at Studio Acquire, but they were worried that it wouldn't look like a modern game, so instead of giving up on the pixel art, they tested out creating a 3D environment for them, using scenes in Final Fantasy VI as an example. If it looked good there, then it would look good in their new game. Final Fantasy has a long history with the pixel sprites not looking at all like the original character designs. It was kind of fun at the time to play through a game, then look at the manual surprised at what the characters actually look like. There's still debates on whether Terra has green or blonde hair. This worried character designer Naoki Ikushima, but the thing is, nobody really cared back then, and so the staff encouraged him to create his characters without worrying about how they'd turn out in the end. While the sprite designer did give him some tips, the differences between the sprites and art don't really matter in the final game. We were first introduced to the game as Project Octopath Traveler in the first Nintendo Switch presentation, a year and a half before it finally released. However, at the time, they hadn't quite determined how the game would look, and so everything in the trailer was made just for the presentation. But thanks to the positive response, this trailer ended up becoming a proof of concept for the game that the whole team could rally around. During development, it's hard to know what other people will think, so this was their opportunity to see if people liked what they were going for. Thanks for watching OTAQUEST in Japan. Feel free to subscribe to find out more about the art and creation of Japanese pop culture.